Hello, everyone. Welcome. I know that we are still getting people admitted, so I'm going to give that just another couple of seconds to get everyone to have audio on and ready to go for the webinar. All right, I think with that, we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Miner, and for those of you that have not met me, I'm a consultant working with the Indiana Broadband Office on all things challenge process. So we've had several webinars about the challenge process for Indiana's BEAD program, but we had several requests to do a multi-dwelling unit specific webinar. So if you've been on any of our other webinars, some of this content may look familiar, but today we'll be specifically looking at how to submit a multi-dwelling unit challenge and what that means. So we're going to do a bit of a BEAD overview. I'll switch to the agenda on the next slide. We're going to do a BEAD overview, and then we're going to talk about the challenge process specifically. We'll talk about all of the challenge types and then jump specifically into the multi-dwelling unit challenges. I doubt that we will have much time left over at the end of this call for questions today, but I would say if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat and we will try to answer those as we go. And then otherwise, I will pause at the end for questions. And then we'll talk about this at the end as well, but the broadband office is always reachable via email. If you have questions after this webinar, the recording itself and the slides will be posted online. And then we are also hosting 2 office hours a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 3 p.m. It's just a Zoom link and it's a very informal place to come and ask questions about anything related to BEAD, the challenge process. So if you have additional questions about multi-dwelling unit challenges after this presentation, certainly feel free to attend those and we can get you those invitations. So without further ado, I think I will jump right in to our webinar for today, unless anyone from the broadband office wants to do additional introductions for this call.
No, I think we're all set to go, Megan. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. All right, so today we are talking specifically about the challenge process within the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. So here is some brief overview for some members on this call that may not be as familiar with the BEAD program. So it's one of several programs at the federal level that are committed to high-speed internet programs. So BEAD overall is almost $50 billion across the nation. And it is specifically for building out broadband infrastructure to the premises of a house. So for high-speed, reliable internet. As you'll see across here, the NTIA, which is the federal government office that runs the BEAD program, has several broadband-focused programs, including that digital equity program that you see right there. But BEAD is by far the biggest in terms of investment. And so every single state was awarded some portion of that $50 billion for broadband deployment. So Indiana's specific BEAD allocation is $868 million. So as we are talking about the challenge process and everything that comes next, all of this is preparing the Indiana Broadband Office to be really good stewards of this $868 million and make sure that we spend it in the best way possible to make sure that every single address in the state of Indiana ends up with high-speed, reliable broadband service. The BEAD program is focused really on 3 pillars. So the first of those is access, as mentioned. So really building out that infrastructure for unserved and underserved households, making sure that they have that high quality service that's needed for full participation in the world these days. But there are also 2 other pillars, which are affordability. So knowing that even if we build this infrastructure, it still has to be affordable and people have to be able to access it, to be able to receive the benefits of that broadband service, and then right in alignment with that, adoption and equity as well. So I mentioned that digital equity side of things on a previous slide, and that really goes hand in hand with BEAD. So while BEAD is really focused on deployment, the IBO is also simultaneously working on digital equity efforts to make sure that we can have widespread adoption, understanding, digital skills training, et cetera, to work alongside our infrastructure deployment. For the BEAD program specifically, there are 3 different priorities for building out this infrastructure. The first would be unserved locations. So these are locations in the state of Indiana that have no service or very limited service. So the number you'll see is less than 25 over 3. And that is going to be, it's going to be really difficult to do kind of the normal things that you like to do on the internet, to stream something on Netflix, to do your homework. This is going to be a really, really limited level of service. And these are the highest priority addresses and locations across the state for us to reach with the BEAD funds. And then that second tier of priority are those underserved locations. So these are locations that have above 25 over 3, but are still less than 100 over 20. In terms of speed, this may mean that maybe one person can do things successfully on the internet, be on a video call or stream something. But once you have several devices or really trying to do, anything that might be required from school from home or work from home, it's going to be really difficult. And then the final priority for those BEAD funds are what are called community anchor institutions. So these are our schools, our libraries, institutions like that that encourage widespread use of broadband service. So Indiana is really going to be focusing on those top 2 priorities with our $868 million. That is where the large part of the money is going to go in these efforts. So wanted to give a bit of a rundown of the BEAD program timeline. I think explaining what BEAD is and how much money Indiana has to spend really highlights how important the challenge process is, which is what we're going to talk about today. So Indiana has been doing lots of preparation for everything BEAD related. So in 2023, we hosted several listening sessions across the state. And Indiana also submitted its initial proposal to the NTIA. So this was the 2-volume document that detailed how we were going to do our challenge process, how subgrantee selection was going to work, everything about how Indiana was planning to use these funds. We received approval on volume 1 in January, which is why we are starting our challenge process. So challenge process began just a couple of days ago at the beginning of March. It will run through July. And then after the challenge process is complete, the Indiana Broadband Office will move into its subgrantee selection. So this will be the place where that money that is coming from the federal government actually gets awarded out to internet service providers to start deploying this infrastructure and building out that service. You can expect to see that kind of fall and winter of this year, and then Indiana will be submitting its final proposal to the NTIA in early 2025. So this is a bit of a picture of how of the whole thing, and now we're going to move on to talking about how the challenge process fits specifically within this. So first, what is the challenge process? So as you can see, the BEAD program has lots of different steps. We've had to submit lots of documentation, and create really robust plans about how we're going to do subgrantee selection, how this deployment is going to work. But to make all of this work as well as it possibly can, and to make sure that we have the most accurate data as we move into the next steps, that is exactly why the Indiana Broadband Office is hosting the challenge process. Basically, it's a way to crowdsource evidence and better identify unserved and underserved locations across the state. Make sure that the IBO really has an understanding of what's going on the ground, and so that it can best allocate its resources throughout the BEAD program. So what data specifically is being challenged? So in the challenge process, the whole point of the challenge process, again, to reiterate, is to make sure that we know where the unserved and underserved locations are in the state of Indiana. So it is an opportunity to submit any kind of evidence under the approved list and within the approved challenges to make sure that we know if we have some incorrect data about where is served or not served. So as a baseline, what is being challenged? So the NTIA requires that states begin with the FCC broadband map. So you can go out and look at the FCC broadband map data. This is data that is submitted by internet service providers to the FCC about every 6 months. We get a new release of that. So Indiana will be using the broadband data collection that was released in November of 2023, which is the one that has been most recently released publicly. So we start with that baseline, and then the IBO had to remove what are called enforceable commitments. And so these are any locations that have already been funded with federal, state, specific federal, state, or local dollars. So think this would be anything from the Next Level Connections program, or if a locality used some of their American Rescue Plan funds to fund broadband deployment, we can't have duplicative funds on a single address. So we've removed all of those enforceable commitments, and some of those may be still being built out. And then that is the baseline map for the BEAD challenge process. So if you become a permissible challenger and you submit challenges, that's really the data that you're going to be challenging. That's where it came from. That's how we got to the baseline. So there are roles for everyone in the BEAD challenge process, but there are 3 specific groups that are actually considered permissible challengers. So these are the organizations that can actually go into the challenge portal and submit a challenge. So these are going to be nonprofit organizations, units of local government, and internet service providers. So these are the only 3 types of organizations that can actually go in and submit those challenges. However, want to emphasize that the public still has a role in this challenge process. Likely, permissible challengers will be working with members of the public to identify where there are problems, help gather evidence. Really, it's a funnel. So the public is really important, but that information, because the evidence requirements are kind of high and the challenge process itself is confusing, all of that evidence in those challenges are going to be funneled through these permissible challengers. So this is a more granular timeline of the challenge process itself. So we are right now in the challenge phase, which is why this webinar is very timely. Right now, until April 17th, the Indiana Broadband Office is working to get permissible challengers into the challenge portal and submitting challenges. So overall, there are 44 calendar days to submit those challenges. If you submit them early, which I would highly encourage you to do, the IBO can review those and make sure that there's sufficient evidence for that challenge, because all of those challenges have to be reviewed to make sure that they meet kind of the minimum level of evidence. And if you do, like I said, submit those early, you may have time for some revision if that's needed. Immediately after the challenge phase, we will move into a 14-day period for the Indiana Broadband Office to review challenges for evidence. So this is going to be, we're expecting a pretty high volume at the end of the challenge phase. So you will not be able to do revisions during this 14-day period. This is just going to be the final cleanup time for the Broadband Office to review everything that comes in. After the challenge phase, we'll move into the rebuttal phase. So this is 30 calendar days that internet service providers are able to submit rebuttal evidence to any specific challenges against their service. So they have 30 days to do so. And then finally, we move into the last phase, which is 30 calendar days for the Indiana Broadband Office to review any locations that both got a challenge and a rebuttal and make a final determination about whether or not that address is eligible for the BEAD program. So, challenge process registration. So first of all, if you have not been to the connectingindiana.com website, I would highly recommend that you go and check it out. That is going to be the place that we're going to direct you to for many things challenge process related. That's where Indiana's speed test is. So you can gather some speed test evidence on that website. It has additional information. This is also where you go to register to become a permissible challenger. So you'll go to that connectingindiana.com website and click that register now button in the top right-hand corner. You'll need an EIN to be able to register. And then we also ask that you please register with an email address that is associated with your organization. The Indiana Broadband Office has to review every single registration that comes in to make sure we're letting only permissible challengers in and that we don't have duplicative organizations. So you'll be asked to upload some documents if you have them, just so that we can make sure that we're letting the right people into the process. And so that initial registration as well, that is for an overarching organization. After the organization itself has been approved, you can add multiple users to the same organization. So we're seeing really quick turnaround times here, but please don't have multiple people in your organization register the organization. Just have one person do that, and then you can add multiple users once you have been approved. So that's logistically what it looks like to register for the challenge process. At this point, I'm going to move into the challenge types and really get into that multi-dwelling unit content. So another caveat that I will give is that there are more challenge types in the challenge process than are listed on this screen. However, only certain challenge types can be used with a multi-dwelling unit challenge. So that is what we are going to cover today. So if you get into the challenge portal and you see that there are other challenge types, please know that these 5 that are listed on the screen are actually the only ones that can be used with a multi-dwelling unit challenge. So to move through these challenge types first, these are what are called eligible challenges, and there's a description of each of these on the right-hand side of the screen. And then we'll also talk about what evidence substantiates each of these challenge types. So the first of these is an availability challenge. And essentially what this means is perhaps in the data, it shows that a certain level of service is available at a location. But when a consumer contacts an internet service provider for one reason or another, it turns out that that service is actually not available at that location. So an availability challenge does not have to be someone who is actually a subscriber to that internet service. It could be anyone maybe who's looking for service in their area and realizes that no, actually, it's being reported as available to me, but it actually is not. The next challenge type would be a speed challenge. So this is going to be when a customer is actually paying for a certain service tier, a certain speed of internet connection, but they find when they take a speed test that they are not actually getting that level of service. And so this is particularly relevant for those unserved and underserved thresholds. So we'll be looking at that, especially for that 100/20. So this would be proven through speed tests. And so this is someone who is actually paying for that service, but isn't getting the speed that they're actually paying for. We know, based on what we're seeing already, and also from talking to other states, and just generally what we hear from the public, as we go around the state, that availability and speed challenges are going to be the most common ones that we see. So the rest of the presentation, as we're talking about how multi-dwelling unit challenges relate to this, we'll be focusing on availability and speed. But again, if you have additional questions afterwards, would be happy to go through any more of these challenge types. So the final 3 that can be used with a multi-dwelling unit challenge, the first is latency. So this would be if the location has latency in their internet connection that is more than 100 milliseconds. And again, this is going to be proven via speed tests. Data cap, this is going to be if the only service that's available to you at that location has some kind of monthly capacity allowance, a data cap that is too low. And then finally, technology type. So this would be if an internet service provider is maybe saying that they provide fiber service to a location, but they're actually providing licensed fixed wireless. So the technology type of how the service is being delivered is incorrect for that address. So these are all of the challenge types that can be used with a multi-dwelling unit challenge. To jump specifically into those availability and speed challenges, I do want to talk about what evidence substantiates those. So again, for availability, that is where the service that is being reported at that location is not actually available to the consumer. So there might be several different types of evidence for this kind of challenge. Maybe if you search your address on a provider webpage and it shows up as we don't serve that location, screenshot that provider webpage and there's your evidence. Maybe if you've had a conversation with a provider, either via letter or email or on the phone, that could potentially be proof if they're saying, no, we don't provide this service, or you submitted a service request and it wasn't fulfilled. Those are going to be the types of evidence that you're looking for an availability challenge. And then a speed challenge. Speed challenges, I will say, have one of the highest levels of evidentiary requirements, and these are NTIA requirements. So for every single location where you are submitting a speed challenge, to be able to prove that you are actually not receiving the speed that you're paying for, you need to provide 3 speed tests taken on 3 different calendar days. You'll need to have the IP address of that location. You'll need to have some kind of proof of the speed tier that the customer is subscribing to. Most often, this can be found on a bill. Um, It'll say what level of service the individual is paying for, and then the name and address of the customer conducting those speed tests. So again, 3 speed tests on 3 different days. So some pretty high level of evidence. But again, you can go and take a speed test on connectingindiana.com, take a screenshot of that, do that 3 days in a row, and you're getting to your evidence. So how does that all fit into a multi-dwelling unit challenge? So I would say a multi-dwelling unit challenge is kind of an add-on to any of those challenge types. It is a way to lower the burden of proof for challenging an entire multi-dwelling unit with one of those challenge types. So rather than having to gather evidence of a challenge for every single unit within a multi-dwelling unit, to substantiate a challenge for that entire location against a specific provider and technology type. Instead, you have to get evidence from at least 3 units or 10% of the units, whichever is larger. So again, to reiterate, it's a way to lower the burden of proof. It creates a lower standard for which you have to gather evidence. We did not have this type of challenge to challenge a multi-dwelling unit for every single location. You would have to have evidence from every single location, every single unit within that building. Now, with a multi-dwelling unit challenge, you need 3 or 10%, and then it will automatically trigger a challenge for all of the other units within that same building against the same provider and technology type. And we're going to talk through an example because I know that that is a little bit confusing. Um, a reminder that all of these challenges have to be submitted at a provider and technology type level. So this is not going to automatically switch the units to just being challenged for every single provider. It will be specifically for that provider and technology type that was being challenged and for which you have evidence. So to talk through a brief example, so we'll say that this is a multi-dwelling unit and it has 9 units in it. And we'll say that a provider reports that all locations within this building have 100 over 20 service available to them. But when residents try to contact that provider to get it at their apartment, the provider says, nope, that level of service is not available to you. So this would be an availability challenge. So the residents want to gather evidence and submit it up through a permissible challenger to actually submit an availability challenge on their behalf. However, gathering evidence for all 9 of these units is pretty cumbersome. It takes a lot of work and coordination. So instead, by using a multi-dwelling unit challenge, the permissible challenger only has to gather evidence from 3 of these units rather than all 9. So all 3 of those have to be against the same provider and same technology type. But if you have evidence for 3 units within the multi-dwelling unit, it will then trigger a challenge for all of the units within a multi-dwelling unit. So just to reiterate that here, again, same provider and technology type, but will trigger a challenge for all of the units in that location if you meet that 3 or 10% threshold. All right. I'm actually going to pause. Are there any questions right now that people want to ask via chat? Next, we're going to jump into some demonstrations of how you would actually submit those challenges or understand how to find a unit count. But I want to pause and see if there are any questions about what a multi-dwelling unit challenge is before I move forward. Feel free to either put it in the chat or come off of mute quickly.
I'm not seeing any in the chat right now. So if anybody wants to come off of mute.
All right.
We
Great.
have one actually, Megan, that just popped up. A couple. Can you also show how to rebuttal an MDU challenge?
Okay, so I saw one in the chat that is, what's the definition of a multi-dwelling unit? So that is, yep, going to be 3 or more. That is correct. And then on the second question, this webinar itself is not going to cover the rebuttal process. We can cover that in an office hours if you'd like to attend. This is geared specifically towards the challenge phase itself and submitting multi-dwelling unit challenges.
Another one came in. What are the practical differences between an MDU challenge and a BSL challenge? If a BSL challenge was accepted for an MDU, wouldn't that require BEAD to spend dollars to connect all the units?
So all challenges and all information in the fabric is related to a specific location. So it's at an individual location level. So a singular unit within an MDU is a location. So if you are submitting a BSL challenge, so just one single one, it would only trigger that specific unit to be eligible for BEAD funding. That is why these multi-dwelling unit challenges are really important, so that we can make sure we reach the threshold of evidence to actually get all of those units in a singular building to be challenged. Good question.
Another one, if there are 2 carriers in an MDU, do you need to get 3 units from each carrier to challenge all the units?
Yes, that would be correct. So all challenges are at a specific provider and technology type level. So if you are looking to transition a full multi-dwelling unit that maybe has 2 providers that you think should be challenged, you would need to then get at least 3 or 10% for each of those providers. That's correct. Good question.
It looks like we're caught up for now,
All right.
unless there's anything else. Okay,
That's
all
great.
you, Megan.
All right, so now we are going to move into showing how you would actually submit a multi-dwelling unit challenge and use the functionality within the challenge portal itself. So again, the challenge portal is going to be accessible if you have registered on connectingindiana.com. And this is going to be a bit of a walkthrough so that you know what that looks like. So first, checking the unit count. So knowing whether you need to submit 3 units or 10%, depending on the unit count. We want to make sure that you are equipped to know what the reported unit count is at multi-dwelling units. So when you access the challenge portal itself, you will see, when you first open it, it will show a dashboard, and you will see those 2 options on the left-hand side. It will say dashboard and challenge map. And so what you will do is actually click challenge map. And so for every multi-dwelling unit challenge, you're only going to be submitting 1 multi-dwelling unit at a time. So if you are looking to find a unit count so that you know how much evidence you need to gather, you will search in the upper right-hand corner for an address. And then, and this is just a random example, all of the addresses throughout this presentation are just examples. You will find that left-hand side of the map will pop out. And you'll see all kinds of information about that specific address. So you see the address at the top there, and then it will give you the building type. We're seeing residential and business, and it will tell you the unit count that is actually reported in the FCC data. So for this one, you would know, okay, I have to find 3 units worth of evidence to actually trigger a multi-dwelling unit challenge. So you would be able to do this and look it up for every single one of the multi-dwelling units that you may be thinking about challenging. You can also access this map. You do without being registered as a permissible challenger. If you go to connectingindiana.com, one of the options on that main page is see map, and it is going to be the exact same map that is within the portal. So if you would like to do that without getting into the portal, please go to connectingindiana.com. But this is how you would see a unit count to understand what type of evidence or how many units of evidence that you need to submit. So next, I'm going to walk through what an availability challenge looks like with a multi-dwelling unit challenge on top of it. So again, this is what it's going to look like when you log in directly to that challenge portal. You're going to see a dashboard. It'll give you some summary information about how many challenges you've submitted, and then if they've been reviewed by the Indiana Broadband Office, how many of those need revision or have gone through that initial review. So from every single page within the challenge portal, you are actually able to submit a challenge. So you would click that Add Challenge button, and it will put you into the full flow for creating a challenge. So you can kind of see that flow across the top of the screen here. You'll go through challenge category, challenge type, filling in challenge details, selecting locations, uploading evidence, and then a quick attestation. So again, there are only certain types of challenges that can actually be used with a multi-dwelling unit challenge. All of those are going to be provider service level challenges. So challenging a specific provider's service at an address level. So that's what you would click to start an availability challenge. Then you're going to get to selecting a specific challenge type. And so you'll see here all of the challenge types under provider service level are those ones that we discussed at the beginning that are actually eligible for that multi-dwelling unit challenge. So in this case, you would select an availability challenge. Next, it is going to ask you if you are specifically trying to file a multi-dwelling unit challenge. You need to select yes on this page to be put into the proper flow and to have your challenge recognized as a multi-dwelling unit challenge. So you will select yes and then click next. On the next screen, so just another piece of functionality that's nice within the portal. Once you select yes, that you are trying to do a multi-dwelling unit challenge, it is automatically going to filter this map on the left-hand side of the screen down to the multi-dwelling units in the state. And I will say, as you zoom in closer in the portal, more of those dots are going to appear for individual locations. But all the filtering is going to be done for you, pre-filtered to help that process. So then at this point, you would select the reason why you are submitting that availability challenge. It's going to give you a drop down. The options are going to be things like that service is not actually available at my location, or the provider quoted me a non-standard installation fee to get that service, or something along those lines. So you'll select the drop down that makes the most sense for this specific multi-dwelling unit. And then you will select a specific provider and specific technology type that this challenge will be challenging. So then on the next slide, this is where you are going to select your multi-dwelling unit. So first, you're going to start by searching for the address in the top right-hand corner. You'll search for it. You will click Add to Challenge. You can see that circled in red there, and then it will show up on the right-hand side. And then this is where it's going to ask you to enter a comma-separated list of the specific units that you would like to challenge. You will need to do this to do the multi-dwelling unit challenge successfully. Then you will move on to the next step, which is uploading all of the evidence. So the first thing that you'll do, there's going to be a descriptor of what exactly you need to fill out and upload on the page. You will scroll down and you will see this blue download evidence spreadsheet button. You will click that and it will download a pre-filled CSV onto your computer. This is what the CSV looks like. So I'm going to give you just a second to take that in. So to walk through this, the first two columns are going to be pre-filled with that location ID and the unit number that you filled in. And then the rest of the fields are going to be what you need to fill in to substantiate this challenge. The first is going to be the evidence type for each of those units. So that's going to be, is it the provider website? Is it an email? Is it an in-person interaction? Then you're going to have the evidence file. So this is going to be the file name of the actual screenshot, PDF, whatever you're uploading, so that we can make sure that's matched appropriately to the unit. Then you'll give us the date of evidence collection. And then finally, there is an optional description field where you can provide additional information if you think that is needed for this particular challenge. So again, this pre-filled CSV will be downloaded to your computer. You will fill it out. And then once you have filled it out, you will go back to this screen. you will see there are two locations for upload. So the top one is going to be where you re-upload that CSV file that you've just filled out. And then the bottom one, that's where you're going to upload all of your evidence files. So again, that's going to be a PDF of an email or a screenshot of the website or a picture of the letter that the provider sent you, whatever substantiates and meets that level of evidence for the availability challenge. And then finally, you're going to complete that attestation that everything you have submitted is right to the best of your knowledge, and then your challenge is complete. So that is what an availability challenge would look like. I am going to pause again for any questions in the chat.
I'm not seeing any new ones yet. If anybody has anything to add. I think we're okay for now, Megan.
Okay, great. So next, I'm going to move into those speed challenges. So as we mentioned, speed challenges are one of the highest levels of evidentiary requirements across all of the challenges. So they are a little bit complicated whenever you're submitting those, which is why we want to walk through it. But you're going to notice it's going to look really, really similar to how you would submit an availability and MDU challenge. So again, as always, you're always starting from that same dashboard. Again, adding a challenge is accessible from every single location within the dashboard. You'll click that Add Challenge button. Again, you're going to go to that provider service level challenge. Those are the types of challenges that can be included in the multi-dwelling unit challenges. And then this time around, you're going to click on that speed challenge type. And then again, it will flow you through asking whether this is specifically a multi-dwelling unit challenge. You will need to select yes to make sure that everything else in the flow follows appropriately for getting those unit numbers and making sure that your CSV file is appropriate for the type of challenge that you are trying to submit. All right, so in a speed challenge, again, that map is going to pre-filter to make things a little bit easier on you. Again, you are going to choose that provider and technology type specifically that you are challenging. So in the question before we jumped into this, when it was asking what if there are two providers, you would then submit two separate challenges where you are selecting those two separate providers and uploading the two separate sets of evidence. That's basically how this would work. So in the speed challenge, same thing. You're going to select that provider and then the technology type that is being challenged. And then again, once you go to the next screen, you'll be selecting locations. And again, this is where you will be prompted to enter that comma separated list of units. So you can do as many units as you have evidence for. You can certainly do more than 3, even if 3 is, what you need for that multi-dwelling unit. We are happy to get more evidence for these. But that comma separated list of unit numbers is required to move on to the next screen. And you can make this specific to the multi-dwelling unit if it has, it's totally fine if it has either letters or numbers in that unit number. All right, and then the same thing, you're going to get a lot of instruction at the top of the screen, but when you scroll down, there's going to be a blue button for download speed test CSV. And again, that is going to download a pre-filled CSV to your computer to fill out. On the next slide, I have what that CSV file looks like. So this one is a little bit more complicated than that availability challenge because there is a lot of evidence that needs to be submitted for a speed challenge. So those first 3 columns are going to be pre-filled for a speed challenge, and you'll see that every single unit that you are challenging has 3 different rows, and those are for those 3 different speed tests that have to be taken on 3 different days. So essentially, you are filling out a row in this CSV for every single speed test that is submitted for that individual unit. So in this example, there are actually 9 total rows because we've challenged 3 units with 3 speed tests each. So those will be pre-filled. Moving on to the next field, that speed test files field, that is going to be the name of the file that actually shows the speed test results. So this could be the screenshot from the Connecting Indiana website, or there's also a download PDF button, but it's going to be that file name so that we can match that specific piece of evidence back to the individual unit. Then you're also going to enter the customer name, the customer address. Those should be pretty straightforward as we're working on the speed test. If you're taking that speed test on connectingindiana.com and pushing people there, that PDF or screenshot will have all of that information available. Then the next one is that speed tier certification file. And so this has been a point of confusion. But remember, along with those 3 speed tests to substantiate a speed challenge, you also have to have proof of the level of service that the consumer is actually paying for. So this is going to be the name of the file that shows that subscription speed tier. Again, this is likely to be a bill or a screenshot within their provider portal, but that is going to be the file name that goes there that actually certifies the speed tier that the person is paying for. The next field is going to be the test method. There are several options for that. You can look at the instructions on the screen within the challenge portal, but if you use the connectingindiana.com speed test, here is the text that you would put in that field. And then finally, you're going to fill in the results and date and time from that specific speed test. These fields here at the end, if you are using that connectingindiana.com speed test, all of this information is going to be readily available for you to copy into the CSV file if you've taken a screenshot of that final screen or downloaded that results PDF. So we know that this is certainly a heavy lift to fill in all of this information as you're trying to do challenges. It's really to make sure that we get that high quality evidence and we can make, a confident decision and be in alignment with federal government requirements. However, if you have any questions about filling out this CSV, or you've gathered all of the evidence and you're still having a hard time getting it into the format that's required for the challenge portal, please reach out to the IBO. We may be able to help you kind of fill out this CSV file and get everything formatted appropriately. So then finally, to finish out this speed challenge, once you've filled out that CSV, just like the availability challenge, you'll go back to the challenge portal. You will re-upload that completed spreadsheet. And then in the bottom there, that is where you will upload all of those speed test files and the evidence of the subscription tier. So you are likely to have 4 different evidence files for every single unit that you are challenging. So that would be those 3 speed tests and then the speed tier certification file. Then if you scroll down on the screen, the federal government, the NTIA, also requires that we gather the median speed that was gathered from those speed tests. So you will fill that in for each of the units, the median download speed and the median upload speed. Then you will click the checkbox. And then finally, the last step of the challenge submission process is that attestation at the end. This is where you just attest that all of the data that you've submitted is correct to the best of your knowledge. Then you will click submit challenge and you will get to the end of the speed challenge and you'll be able to see it on your dashboard as in review. We do have a little bit of time, so before I go into final reminders, I will pause one more time for questions. Not sure if there are any in the chat.
None in the chat. If anybody wants to come off of mute or type something. I think we're okay for now.
Okay. Well, then I know that this has been a lot of information about different challenge types and specifically multi-dwelling unit challenges in a very short amount of time. So just want to leave you with a couple of dates and reminders as you leave the webinar. So first, just to reiterate that timeline. So we are still quite early in Indiana's challenge phase. That timeline goes until April 17th. So that is the full timeline to be able to submit challenges. So if you are interested in submitting multi-dwelling unit challenges, would highly encourage you to start kind of strategizing about that and starting to collect that evidence. Please make sure that it is submitted by April 17th. After that point in time, we will not be able to accept any more challenges that are submitted. And then again, we'll move into that challenge review process. Then we'll move into that rebuttal phase, which internet service providers will be able to submit rebuttal evidence for multi-dwelling unit challenges. And then finally, we'll move into final determinations. So I want to remind you of these dates, especially April 17th, as the deadline to get in and submit those challenges. And then finally, I also wanted to give you a list of resources because the BEAD program overall is really large and complex, and the challenge process is complex as well. So the IBO is here for you as much as we can be to answer questions and also help you through the process. So first, there are tons of materials available on the Indiana Broadband Office website. It's a primary source of information. It has the CSV file templates. It has guides to submitting challenges. It has ways to connect with your community. So if you have questions or you're looking for materials or flyers, the IBO website is where you're going to want to go. It also has all of the recorded webinars and slides. And as Leela mentioned in the chat, and I mentioned verbally, we'll also be posting this webinar online if you want to go back and reference it. And then another thing, on the connectingindiana.com portal or on the connectingindiana.com website, there's also a public facing portal. So this is a way to gather evidence. This is a place where the public can actually come in and submit comment about their service at their individual location. So this is not submitting a challenge, but it is a way for permissible challengers to maybe canvass their areas and see if there need to be challenges submitted. So if you have questions about that public facing portal, would be happy to send you some materials after this. And then finally, we do have some technical assistance as well. As mentioned, we have those IBO office hours every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Those go through the remainder of the challenge process. So let's say you don't have a question this week, but maybe next week you're getting ready to submit your challenges and you need some help. Feel free to hop onto those office hours. Those are a very informal time to ask questions. And then if you have any other technical assistance needs, issues with the portal itself, or not understanding exactly where things go, you can always reach out to the Indiana Broadband Office. We're also happy to walk you through the process of actually submitting a challenge if that's confusing or difficult for you. We know it's certainly very complicated, so we're happy to hop on a call and get that done. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for listening to this webinar, hopping on today. I think we will pivot to questions for the remaining 10 minutes if we have any, but feel free to drop if you need to. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your help to make Indiana's challenge process as best as it can be. All right, with that, I'll pivot to questions.
We did have one pop in, a couple actually, I think. Oh no, just one. Approximately how many challengers of each type have registered?
Yeah, that is a good question. We are still getting several registrations a day, so I don't actually know that I have the most up-to-date number, but I can give you a sense generally of what we're looking at. I will say, in terms of permissible challengers, we are certainly, like most other states, seeing internet service providers being, the highest portion of permissible challengers. But I would say about a third of the registrations are being made up of local government units and nonprofit organizations combined. Good question. Any other final questions in the chat?
No questions, but several thank yous.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can close out this session. Thank you all so much and have a good rest of your Monday.